20th of this month, or the week beginning the 20th of this month. But our priority right now is to have a phased return to schools.
A revised version of the Level 5 plan is due to be published in 2 weeks' time, but only schools and construction can expect any change after March 5th.
We need to get numbers down very low, as low as possible, before we can safely reopen our society and our economy again. And I believe that's what all of us want in this House. There's little point in reopening things that you then have to close 3 weeks later.
Today, a further 18 countries are being added to the mandatory 14-day quarantine list for international arrivals, while special schools reopen their doors with reduced capacity. Meanwhile, the head of the HSE has warned that we are in the middle of the current wave, not the end.
There is, I think, beginning to be a wind behind us, both in terms of transmission levels of the virus and what we're seeing happening in our hospitals. However, it's also important we remember exactly where we are. Our hospitals are in national storage capacity. We're utilising beds that are not normally our ICU beds.
It comes as those aged over 70 are set to receive both doses of their vaccine by mid-May. The Health Minister says a mass vaccination programme is challenging, but being part of the EU approach is right for Ireland.
By working as part of the EU, we now have advance purchase agreements in place for almost 16 million vaccine doses. We now have 3 highly effective and safe vaccines authorised for use for all adults.
GPs are set to begin vaccinating the over 85s from Monday. Aisling Roach, Virgin Media News.
Well, for more on vaccines, our correspondent Paul Coggan is here, and we saw a little bit of Micheál Martin in Aisling's package there. During that same CNN interview, Paul, he defended the EU rollout.
Yes, so the target now to vaccinate the over 70s seems to be mid-May. The original hope was that they would be fully vaccinated by the end of March. So that target has moved out considerably for a number of reasons. The first one, obviously, was the supply issues with AstraZeneca. But then the decision last week to not give AstraZeneca to the over 70s, instead to give them Pfizer and Moderna. So this has pushed it out quite a bit. We heard yesterday from the European Commission quite a big admission that they'd gotten things wrong, that they'd been over-optimistic in their targets for the first half of this year. And as a result, EU member states, including Ireland, are lagging quite a bit behind Britain and the US. So the Taoiseach was asked in that CNN interview what he made of the EU strategy to date on vaccinations, and this is what he had to say.
I think that is the correct strategy. I think member states competing with each other would have been, in my view, wrong and would have undermined the vaccine effort. From a EU bloc position in member states, it made absolute sense.
What about from the perspective of an Irish citizen?
Of vaccine procurement. Certainly from the perspective of an Irish citizen, because I wouldn't have liked the prospect of competing with larger member states across Europe to procure vaccines. That would have made it much more challenging.
So the essence of what he's saying there is small countries like Ireland might have been in a scramble with big EU member states to negotiate their own contract with the various drug manufacturers, and we might have been left in the lurch were it not for the EU strategy. But nonetheless, there's a lot of frustration around the country and indeed in government circles about how it has panned out. Also in that interview, he said again, he reckons Johnson & Johnson, their one-shot vaccine, could be available in Ireland very early in April, if not before then. So there seems to be some hope that that could help ramp up vaccinations in the second quarter of the year. He also said the goal remains to vaccinate between 70 and 80% of the population by September.
All right, Paul, thank you very much for that update. Well, the head of the HSE says that health workers who refuse to get a COVID-19 jab should be taken off the front line. Paul Reid was speaking at the weekly HSE briefing, where he also gave an update on the vaccine rollout. Well, Paul Quinn is at a vaccination centre in DCU for us this evening. And Paul, he was answering questions about reports of doctors and indeed healthcare workers refusing to get the jab or even give the jab to their patients.
Yeah, that's right, Colette. Well, as you say, we're here at DCU, which is one of the 3 national vaccination centres set up so far. And centres like this is going to play a key role in the vaccine rollout, particularly for the over 70s. We know that GPs from next Monday will start administering the vaccines to the over 85s. But as you say, there's a lot of focus on this programme. And in recent days, there's been a lot of focus on healthcare workers who are refusing to get the jab. We heard from one nursing home operator who was doing raffles, offering cash incentives to encourage their staff to get the vaccine. And today we hear from one GP in Kildare who says that he's refusing to offer the vaccine to his patients. Now, we asked Paul Reid about this at a HSE briefing earlier on today. He said it was shocking, he was disappointed, and he explained what would happen to healthcare workers working with the HSE who refused the jab.
There have been some instances where frontline healthcare workers haven't taken it up. Frankly, I find that inexcusable. The only process to address that is through health and safety legislation, where a risk-based assessment is carried out, and if that risk-based assessment determines the frontline worker does need a vaccination to carry out that work, that's the legislation that currently exists. And if the person doesn't take up the vaccine, well, then they're not suitable to do that kind of work and have to do something else. But that's the current legislation just that provides under Health and Safety Act.
Now, as I say, more than 84 GP practices from next week. Vaccination centres like this will start offering the jab to the over 70s, beginning with the over 85s. Some 12,000 doses next week will be administered. Plans also underway for around 40 other national vaccination centres right across the country. Of course, the expectation and the hope is that all of the over 70s will receive and be fully vaccinated by the middle of May.
All right, Paul, thank you very much for that update. Well, opposition parties say the government is causing confusion over the reopening of the country. Our political correspondent Gavin Riley is at Leinster House for us this evening. And Gavin, vaccine rollout once again dominating proceedings today in the Dáil. But the government also pressed on what is the overall COVID, the ultimate COVID strategy, and mixed messaging.
That's right, a lot of ambiguity still around exactly how 2021 is going to pan out while we wait for full, or at least broadly, mass vaccination across Irish society. We know there's going to be a new revised Living with COVID plan published in 2 weeks' time. That's a revision of the levels 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 that we have right now. That might give us some indication of what might be allowed at other levels if Ireland was to